You're listening to What Goes On Here, and I'm Sam Walker. Whoever we are and whatever we do, we all have moments when we feel like we don't quite fit with the world around us. What Goes On Here is where you can listen to real stories of people who at times couldn't see a way forward, people who found themselves stuck, maybe in a life they never imagined would be theirs, people who had to face their fears, face themselves, but they changed, and changed lives of people around them too. On Season 3, this is Episode 5, Mastin. Mastin Kipp's an author, an entrepreneur, and a performance coach. He founded thedailylove.com and now travels all over the world running workshops and retreats for thousands of people.
That's a responsibility, and every person there is a soul, and they have a heart and dreams and aspirations and fears.
But Mastin actually started out in the music business. And by his early 20s, he was already hugely successful, working closely with some of the biggest names in the industry. It was his dream job.
You better believe that, like, when I was growing up and I was in Kansas, I was listening to Limp Bizkit, I was listening to Korn, I was listening to Marilyn Manson and Nine Inch Nails, and I was working for Limp Bizkit's manager. I was working with the band that I grew up loving. Like, I was having so much fun. I remember one time I got to sit next to Jim Marshall as he photographed Limp Bizkit and Metallica at the LA Coliseum in front of, I think, 30 to 50,000 people.
But then Mastin lost his job and his life went out of control.
It was heartbreaking because this is everything that I put my heart and soul into. I felt very much like a victim, and like I wanted to blame people, and I spiraled out of control for a while. Twice as many drugs, twice as much alcohol, promiscuous behavior. That was all I did all day for a long period of time.
He ended up jobless, homeless, single, and broke. When you have literally nothing and no idea of what you want to do with your life, how do you survive, let alone thrive?
This is when all hell broke loose, and like money was running away, and like the girl that I was dating left, and the roommate that I was with moved out, and I had like no money. I got gout in my left toe, my lower back seized. The business completely crumbled at that time. Like literally, like everything happened at once.
When you were a kid, what did you dream of being?
What did I dream of being when I was a child? Well, I'm from Kansas, but I grew up in Canada, and the first thing that I ever dreamed of is I wanted to be an all-American kid, and I didn't really know like what that meant. I just, from Canada looking down at the United States, it was just so cool. All the entertainers that were down there, and the sports figures, and just everything just seemed larger than life. And so I wanted to be in that game. It was just something that would be fun, and I had no idea really what that meant. And then I got into looking at entertainment, and I fell in love with, and to date myself a little bit, but when Puff Daddy was just bigger than life, and that was back before he was called P Diddy. I wanted to be a mogul. I didn't even know what that meant, but that was like the thing. I wanted to be a mogul. And then I started researching people like David Geffen and Steven Spielberg and Jeffrey Katzenberg, and I was really fascinated by David Geffen's career and his ability to be the guy behind so many incredible artists. And so my intention then shifted to kind of wanting to be sort of like a straight David Geffen, and that's what got me out to Los Angeles.
It is amazing you had such a strong vision at such a young age, because then you achieved this at an obscenely young age. You were what, 19? You get to LA pretty quickly. You're a pretty big deal. What did it feel like, this almost instant success?
It's weird. I was raised with this belief by my mom and my dad that like whatever you put your mind to, you can make happen. They sort of hypnotized me with that idea. So it felt inevitable and very exciting at the same time. So there was never a moment in my mind where I said, well, why did this happen to me? It was like, of course, this is what I've been thinking about forever. But then when it actually happened, it was incredible. And I was not prepared for the level of responsibility or the level of politics or the level of just sort of stress that goes with that job. But I was so single focused on it, Sam, from the beginning. Like when I came to LA, it was my only thing I thought about was stepping into and becoming, senior vice president of A&R at Flawless Geffen Records. It's a very specific goal. And it happened. And it didn't last very long.
Well, let's talk about this. Why it didn't last very long? Because with this huge success, as you said, came huge responsibility, came huge stress, and also came drugs. Can you remember the first time that you took drugs?
I think the drug that had the most significant impact on me at that time was cocaine. And I do remember the first time it was in my girlfriend's bathroom. And I remember thinking to myself, like, my mom's voice in the back of my head was like, anytime that you do drugs, like, your heart will explode. And I was like, so I was preparing for my heart to explode, but I wanted to do it. So I did it, and my heart didn't explode. I actually felt really freaking good. I didn't had no idea the pharmacology of cocaine and what it does to the brain. And all I knew is I just felt better. And so, my relationship at that time was really oriented around addiction. And this was the first girl that I had met. Growing up, I was not really a ladies' man. I was very awkward. I was very much like Jason Biggs from American Pie. That was me in high school. It was definitely, awkward. And so when I met this beautiful girl who, we were she was interested in me, and I was interested in her. Like, I just kind of picked up that lifestyle. And part of it was connected to her, but the other thing was, if I'm really honest, I'd never felt so good or confident in my life, and I had no idea that there was a half-life. I didn't know about, resistance and what happens in the body, and the fact that drugs are, at first they're fun, then they're fun with problems, and they're just problems, and then you're dead, right? So I didn't know any of that type of stuff. I just felt better. But really, I think I was just self-medicating. And frankly, when I first started cocaine, I was thrilled to find this drug because I'd never felt better in my life. That lasted about 2 seconds.
Pharmaceutical highs aside, were you happy?
You better believe that, like, when I was growing up and I was in Kansas, I was listening to Limp Bizkit, I was listening to Korn, I was listening to, Stained, I was listening to Marilyn Manson and Nine Inch Nails, and I was working for Limp Bizkit's manager. I was working with the band that I grew up loving. Like, I was having so much fun. I remember one time, Jim Marshall, who passed away, was a famous rock photographer. We became friends, and I got to sit next to Jim Marshall as he photographed Limp Bizkit and Metallica at the LA Coliseum in front of, I think, 30 to 50,000 people. I didn't know any better at the time, and I think based on where I was, that age and that level of consciousness and those desires, yeah, I was happy. But looking back, knowing what I know now from over a decade of perspective, my standards now, I definitely was not fulfilled. That's for sure.
It sounds like a lot of teenage boys' dreams. It's certainly been your dream as a teenage boy. But you mentioned it all came crashing down. Let's talk about that. What happened?
Well, I got my dream job, and my official title was Senior Vice President of A&R at Flawless Geffen Records. That was Fred Durst's record label. And I was deeper and deeper and deeper using drugs, which nobody knew about. I was very good at hiding it. I was going through a relationship deterioration and breakup with my girlfriend at the time. But what happened was, I haven't actually ever really publicly talked about this, but I think we're far enough away from it that I can. Because I came from a management company to the label, and the label had artists that the management company represented, I had a unique relationship with those artists. And I think I did not understand that people who were higher up on the food chain didn't appreciate that relationship. And so I think I was sort of fired, most likely for retaliation, and maybe because someone's not supposed to have a level of connection with the artist like I did. And that was sort of my takeaway from that experience.
How did you react?
It was heartbreaking because this is everything that I put my heart and soul into. I felt very much like a victim, and like I wanted to blame people, and I spiraled out of control for a while. Twice as many drugs, twice as much alcohol, promiscuous behavior, just all that type of stuff. It just was not. It was just very much just drinking and consuming drugs, and that was all I did all day, and I couldn't handle it for a long period of time.
So what changed?
I had a moment where I was driving back from my ex-girlfriend's home, and we had sort of parted ways, and I got pulled over on Ventura Boulevard it was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Nobody else was on the road, and I cut off a police car. What's the likelihood, right? So this is like a 5-lane road almost. So they pulled me over. I was really tired. I had a bag of cocaine underneath my chair, or my car seat, and my prayer was like, "Dear God, please let me get out of here and not be arrested, and I will quit this drug from now on." Like, I got the message. I think the message was received because I wasn't arrested, and then I went back to my apartment, and then about 2 weeks later, really deep in some depression, and I saw that bag, and I wanted to do the whole thing, and there was this feeling, and I can't describe it other than grace, within my body that said, "Mastin, if you do this, you're going to die." And I flushed it, and I flushed everything down the toilet. And I think I did cocaine maybe one more time after that, and that's been about, I haven't even kept track. I think it's about 15 years ago. And I haven't looked back. So It was just, some people have to go to rehab, which I highly recommend for whatever reason in that moment. It was just that stop it. And I hit a threshold. And my intention was like, I want to feel as good off the drugs as I do on the drugs. And that's led
Yeah.
me to, a lot of what I do now. I think addiction is something that is something you have to be mindful of consistently. You see greats like Philip Seymour Hoffman, who've been sober for 25 years and then take themselves out. So it's something I'm very mindful of. I'm really clear that I never put myself in the same room as cocaine ever ever, ever, ever to this day. Like it's something that I just cannot be around, for sure.
But you got through this period, didn't you? You'd lost your dream job, but the drugs were less of an issue than they had been. You were still in LA and you still had a business.
That time in my life is I haven't really clearly documented it for everyone to understand because there was so much going on. But what happened was is I had left the entertainment game and I had started my own management company for a while. And what happened was I was managing artists and we were getting record deals and getting on the radio, and I invested some money into making a record. All of this stuff was going on, and I just had this real deep desire to be creative. And two really interesting things happened. One was I was introduced to an artist who was a singer-songwriter to manage him, and we became best friends. And he was a model of sobriety for me. And he sort of, just by him, the way he was, and he was very much a wise person, helped me maintain sobriety. And then he introduced me to one of his friends, who was a band called Eon Spoke. And this band, you may have probably not have heard of them, but they had a song in a movie called What the Bleep Do We Know, which is a very famous personal development film that kind of came out before The Secret and stuff like that. And because they had a song in the film, they brought me to this What the Bleep conference, which I didn't even know what that was. And I went there, and there was like all of these like oracle card readers and life coaching people, and like they're taking aura photography. And I'm sitting here going like, you people are really strange. What the hell? Like this is just awful. And I was judgmental as all could be. And then as I was leaving, I was like, I'm not getting my photograph taking my aura. I don't want that. And there was a woman who was taking aura photography, and she was very beautiful. And so I was like, I'll go talk to her and see if I get her number. That was my intention. And she didn't give me her number, but she did say, hey, you might want this. And she gave me a CD collection from a woman named Carolyn Mace with a program called Energy Anatomy, which is probably one of her seminal pieces. So I went right to the heart of her work. And I didn't listen to it for maybe about a year or so, but when I did, it completely changed my life. So it's really interesting how the universe or God or life organizes and kind of like sets you up. My desire to music led me into personal development. And simultaneously, the artist who I had met that had introduced me to this band, he was also a graphic designer, and we had this idea to have a t-shirt company and a record label called Love Yourself. And so we were making records and doing t-shirts, and the t-shirt thing took off far greater than the record did. So we focused on t-shirts. And the t-shirt thing took off, and celebrities started wearing it, and it really blew open my mind around what was possible earning and stuff like that. So it was a very interesting time. We had Jennifer Aniston, Lenny Kravitz, Paris Hilton, the Kardashians, so many folks wearing our stuff, and then that business also crashed and burned. And that was even more heartbreaking than the first one because there was so much time and sweat equity and friendship involved. And that sort of was one of the big catalysts for what I do today.
But of course, this time around, it wasn't just your business that failed. What happened to you is what you have described since as your divine storm. Can you explain?
Yes. This is when all hell broke loose, and like money was running away, and the girl that I was dating left, and the roommate that I was with moved out, and I had like no money. I got gout in my left toe, my lower back seized. I mean, literally my business, like the business completely crumbled at that time. Like literally like everything happened at once. And I was in so much, I say gout and lower back like it's no big deal. Like I could not walk, I could not stand up. Yeah, who gets gout, right? So I was 27 years old, like why? And it's the most debilitating pain ever. And you can't even put a sheet over your foot because it hurts so bad. So it's just imagine like 10,000 knives like stabbing you and then your foot's inflamed. Like it was just awful. And my lower back was out, so I couldn't stand up and I had to move out. So it was very much a comedy of errors, and I definitely didn't have a sense of humor about it at the time. It was devastating, but there was this part of me that said, maybe this is happening for you and not to you. You're not dumb enough to do this to yourself. Like you're not that dumb. Like nobody is that dumb, right? Now you're certainly not smart, because if you were smart, this wouldn't be happening. But definitely you're not that stupid, right? And also, let's just not assume that like God is punishing you. Let's just pretend like this is a good thing. And my survival brain was like, how can I pretend this is a good thing? This is the worst freaking thing to happen to me, and all the stories, right? And so I moved in with my ex-girlfriend's parents, which is the same girlfriend that I was with many years before. And I lived in the pool house for 2 years. And I lived in the pool house for a year, and then I ended up couch surfing for about 2 years. And it was a really hard time because I was asking for help, and receiving help is much more difficult than giving help. But the whole time I was blogging and writing and publishing, and it started to grow and evolve from there.
Can we just talk about this pool house? Because people who perhaps don't live in Southern California might hear the words pool house and think of some palatial garden building. Can you tell me, though, about the place where you were actually living?
Sure. So it was in Los Angeles, and it was in a residential home, and it was about 8 feet by 8 feet. And it's where you put like the thingy that like cleans the pool, or it's like where you put like your, like a life vests for the kids, or like you blow up pool toys. Like that's what it was for.
So like a garden shed.
Yeah, basically. And there was a shower there to like shower off, and a toilet, and a sink. And there was a little tiny closet, right, where you put like some towels or something. So it was very small, and I'm 6'4", so it was very difficult. And the only thing I could fit in this thing were some of my clothes and my bed, and that's it. And I was so far away from the house that I also couldn't have internet, and I was trying to start an internet company, which is ironic. And I was too ashamed to like go ask for internet because it was just I didn't feel good. And so I would go down to a Coffee Bean nearby, which is sort of like Southern California's Starbucks. And literally, like, I would just blog and tweet and write all day and create content in there all day. And like when I would come home, like all of my clothes smelled like coffee, but I couldn't afford it. I'd buy like one drink and stay there all day long. And they got to know me there, but it was a consistent thing that I did every single day. And it was sometimes they would close at like 7 or 8, and I didn't want to still publish, so I'd like drive into like down the street and figure out which home had like no password Wi-Fi, and like from my car, and I would like seriously have a password on your Wi-Fi because someone might be starting a company on your Wi-Fi. But like literally, I just did whatever I had to do to find Wi-Fi and to publish. Like that was my mandate. I just felt this extreme sense of urgency to publish every single day.
So where did that come from? Because just to recap, you had no job, no home, no relationship. You weren't in great health. To be blunt, no one's listening to you. You're putting this stuff out there. You're not getting a whole lot back. What is it inside you that says just keep going?
Well, it's interesting. It's a great question. When I was doing the t-shirt company, I was sending out this thing called the Daily Love just like randomly to friends, like because it just felt fun. And when the dust settled and I logged in, I still have the account. That was one of the only things I was able to pay for every single month was Constant Contact. I still have the account because I have all the archives of the old emails. And I think it was like $15 a month or $20 a month. But when I logged into Constant Contact, I saw 1,000 people in there. And I was like, what? Like 1,000 people sign up for this letter that I send every once in a while. Like that's something. That's more than I have on this t-shirt list. And I was like, maybe I'll just do this and I'll just keep publishing. And I had no idea about marketing or selling stuff. I had no desire to do that at the time either because I thought everyone in personal development was snake oil, which is not true. I was just wanting to publish. And so I think I was just publishing and publishing. It was just, I channeled all of that sort of that addiction mania energy into publishing. It was the thing that made me feel better, and it was very much for me for a long time. And there were times where I wanted to give up, and then the strangest thing happened. About 3 months into being at that pool house, 2 or 3 months in, all of a sudden, like my inbox flooded with all these messages of, people are following you on Twitter, and I was like, what the hell is going on? And Kim Kardashian of all people had tweeted about my account, and overnight went from like 1,000 or 2 to like 10,000, 12,000 people. And like to me, that was a confirmation of like, okay, you're doing the right thing. I was always provided for. There was always like just enough, And I remember one time, like the biggest stretch was that it was coming up on like March of 2012 or no 2010. I can't remember the timeline anymore. I should probably write it out at some point. But it was I knew I was gonna be out of money by like March 1st, and literally I signed my first advertiser and got the check on like February 28th.
Wow.
So like literally the next day I had no money, right? But the check cleared that day. And it was just really awesome. And it was the exact amount of money that I needed for the next 30 days.
You talked about limiting beliefs earlier. How did you get past the threshold of thinking, who's going to listen to me? Because on paper, Mastin, you're an ex-drug addict. You made a lot of money being, as you described yourself, an asshole. Your company has gone under. You're living in a shed. Who's going to listen to you and your advice? How did you muster the belief that people would?
So, a couple things. So, there's a great thinker named Abraham Maslow. And Maslow created this thing called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And he kind of talks about like how human beings develop and like in what order. And so it kind of like the very bottom of this hierarchy is like you got to have food, water, and shelter, right? And at the very top of the hierarchy is kind of like personal growth and spiritual enlightenment, right? And the philosophy is like without like basic needs, you're not going to ascend up into having a higher quality of life, right? So what I thought was when I looked out into the world, what I saw was a lot of people who had a lot of the basic stuff covered. They had food, they had water, they had shelter. There were successful businesses. There were people that were, in the entertainment business who had everything that they wanted. But what I made the observation was that they're really lacking that top layer. There's a lack of fulfillment. There's a lack of happiness and purpose. And so, I very intentionally started the Daily Love as a brand that wasn't me, that didn't have my face on it. That just put out universal truth. And universal truth is universal truth no matter who says it. And so my intention was to sort of fill that higher level need that I saw a lot of people not having. And my assumption was that if I did that, then I would meet people who had resources, and then I would offer them value, and there would be an exchange of resources for value, which is what a business is. And that's exactly what happened. So it wasn't really about me. It was me paying attention to what I thought people needed and then trying to provide that service. Because if I thought about it from the perspective of who's going to listen to me, I probably would have never started. I was really coming from the perspective of, like, what can I create that will be of use? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does completely. And it's interesting you talked there about basic needs, because the more and more people that I talk to as part of this series, it seems so many of us, whatever we do in our lives, settle for okay in jobs, in lifestyle. We ignore what we really desire because we think, well, A, we won't get it, and B, we're okay. I'm not starving, so I'm not going to try for the amazing because I might not get it, and then I won't even have the okay. So forget it, I'll just stay where I am. How do you push past that?
Well, there are a few things. In my industry, we have a saying. It says, good is the enemy of great. The idea is that I remember, like, when I was really getting serious about starting my company, this is pre-couch surfing days, I just felt this tremendous fear in my stomach. And it was one of the only, I'm not really a crier. I think I cried during The Notebook. I cried at the end of Toy Story 3, and I cried when Carrie Fisher died. And I think that was about it, right? And I remember crying and like being curled over and thinking to myself, like, my best days are behind me. I thought I knew what my purpose was. It's gone. I'm too embarrassed, and this thing is not going to work out. And all this need for significance and approval from other people and what the people thought about me was like paralyzing me. And I just had this deep awareness that said, Mastin, in order to become something, you have to risk being nothing. And I thought to myself, like, fine. And then I thought to myself, most of me holding myself back is me trying to impress other people. And I thought to myself, I don't even like most of those people. Why am I trying to impress them? And I thought to myself, like, I just want to be useful. So that was always my intention, was to be useful. And I think that when you're useful, life supports what supports life. And it's not so much really giving up the good as it is like really not giving two flying Fs about what other people think. Trying to impress other people is what keeps people broke. And when other people are dictating what you're buying and what you're driving and what you're wearing and what you're doing and what you're trying to create, then all of a sudden you're living their life, and that's an unexamined life. The Australians are very honest about this. They have tall poppy syndrome, where they want you to be successful to a point, and then they cut you down. I know that it's very similar in the UK as well, and it's like that in the States. It's like that everywhere. Because we get uncomfortable around people who, defy the status quo. And so we even unconsciously try to bring them back down by saying, try to be realistic. And I think being realistic is some of the worst advice that's ever been given personally.
You used to be the guy at the side of the stage watching the artists perform. Now you're on that stage. You go around the world talking to thousands of people. Is the broke guy sat in the pool house still part of you?
Oh, more than ever. Yeah. I mean, I think, at least for me, I can speak for myself. Going through what I went through, I'm ever present that that's a possibility again. And I think one of my all-time favorite people in the world is Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. I love this man. Like, I can't wait to, like, if I ever meet him one day, I'm gonna give him like a big hug and a wet kiss. Like, I just love this guy. And like he has this saying, he talks about like what drives him, which is this idea, he calls it like the wolf is always scratching at the door. And that's part of what drives him. And so part of what drives me is knowing like, hey, look, like this life that you have, this certainty that you have, it's temporary, and like at any time you can basically be back in that pool house. I still feel it. And so I think it's been really a blessing. And I've always been hungry, but this really pushes me further. And I think the other thing that happened, which I haven't mentioned, is that a couple years before this, the partner that I had in the clothing business, his father passed away from leukemia, and I was in the ICU when he passed away with the family, and I saw his body go from a being to a shell, and there was a moment where it felt like the soul left, and it really affected me at the most deepest level because I really got to understand that like one day that's going to be you. And I kind of all of a sudden was like, fear is sort of meaningless because when you're in the presence of death and you're seeing that, I mean, maybe some people would look at that and say, oh my God, one day that's going to be you, freaking out. And for me, it was like, no, like this is going to be you. Like when you get to that deathbed, like be used up fully. Don't live an unexamined life. And his father was just someone who really lived his life out loud in a really beautiful way as an example. And so that was a visceral experience. So between that experience, being in the ICU, and couch surfing for 2 years, and not knowing where food was going to come from tomorrow, it's sort of it's in my nervous system. It's as me now for sure.
I've spoken to lots of people who've done things in the past they're not proud of, and they found different ways of reconciling their past behaviour with who they are now. You've written about the drugs, the gambling, stealing money from your parents that is in your past. How do you deal with it?
It's a very interesting philosophical question because how can you on the one hand do something that's unforgivable and on the other hand still love yourself? So that's sort of what you're asking me. And so I think there's a few things. One, when you're participating in that behavior, when you're being an asshole or when you're stealing or when you're lying, the person who's perpetuating that behavior and doing it is in personal hell as they're doing it in that moment. I'm prefacing what I'm about to say with the understanding that does not mean that continuing to do it is okay. So when you think about reconciling your past and you think about, for example, for me, the drugs that I did, the prostitutes that I slept with, like whatever it was, the degenerative rock star behavior, right? Knowing what I know now, like I know that any behavior that someone does that perpetuates negativity is done so because they are literally experiencing a past trauma and they are coping with it the best way they know how to. This does not make right abuse or violence, and I'm not defending it, I'm explaining it. So when I look back at my life, I know that I was getting my needs met with the tools and the resources that I had available at that time. And it's very well documented in the 12-step community that you're only as sick as your secrets. So for me, it's like I don't look back and regret anything that I've done, nor would I say just because I don't regret it, I want to do it again. So it's a real exercise in self-acceptance. I think that's what true love is. When you can accept who you are and accept the fact that you're hurt and recognize that the addiction or whatever you've done to hurt yourself or somebody else has been a coping mechanism, it lessens the shame. And it doesn't make right what happened, but that really is my mindset around it. And I don't feel like the word reconcile isn't necessarily the word that I would use. I think it's just a lot of compassion for that kid, because he didn't know better. And he was trying to self-medicate. He was trying to feel better. That's all we're trying to do is feel better.
Self-inflicted or not, when you find yourself in the equivalent of your pool house, it's a scary place. As someone who's lost their job, their money, their status, their home, their health, their relationship, what's your message to someone who might be there right now?
A few things. I want you to know that this will not last forever, that the tide will turn. Really ask for help. A lot of people who are in that place are scared or ashamed to ask for help because of some type of negative opinion that they think people have. People want to help. Ask people who are healthy people to ask. Surround yourself with people who lift you up. Find ways to be useful. I think that's one of the most important things. If you're feeling helpless, help somebody. Mother Teresa was once on the radio and asked, by the radio host, like, what can I do to experience God? And she said, tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the morning, go find someone who's homeless and let them know that they're not alone. Right? So it's like, find a way to be useful beyond your pain and beyond your struggle, because you can look around and continue to be victimized by the world, or you can decide that today you're going to help somebody else. And that's just one decision away. I would also say that you want to surround yourself with like-minded people. So stop hanging out with people who think that your dreams are stupid, or stop hanging out with people who try to keep you stuck in your old identity, and find a way. There is always a way. But I think the most important thing to know, I have a tattooed on my arm that says, "This too will pass." So I think it's important to like literally get that tattooed on your arm or somewhere, so that you know that this is not going to last forever. I know that the circumstances can feel eternal, but it's a temporary experience. And so to really just have faith and decide that this is happening for you and not to you, and that there's a greater lesson and a greater life that's coming through you, and listen to the sound of these words over and over and over again until you believe it.
Mastin Kipp was talking to me, Sam Walker. You can find out more about him and his work at mastinkipp.com. You've been listening to What Goes On Here. Coming up next on Season 3, it's the final episode. Episode 6, Lem.
I can't go outside anymore. And I couldn't, and I didn't, and I just sort of folded myself into myself and just died. My head fell into my shoulders, fell down into my chest, and I sort of like closed the curtains of myself, and I was just like